The terror tide has once again turned the spotlight on Africa, which is still struggling with issues of hunger, poverty and good governance. Billions are poured into the continent on a regular basis to ease the impact of these problems. But in the past 5 years, political and religious crises have claimed the lives of hundreds. Those lucky to be alive flee to safer territories, afraid that one day they too might be counted among the dead. And though help comes from afar, the main terror groups Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb continue to decimate Africa's rising population.
The Muslim read and practice the injunction in the Quran, they will be powerful.
The United States is one of Nigeria's partners in this fight, as are some other Western countries. And they've said over and over again that they support Nigeria in this fight until terrorism is finally extinguished. I caught up with the visiting counselor of the U.S. Department of State, Ambassador Tom Shannon, to check in on that support. A few years ago, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton spoke about corruption and good governance in Nigeria. She said the lack of it was restricting our development. Are you still of the same opinion now?
Well, listen, part of our bilateral dialogue revolves around transparency and revolves around the efforts to address issues of corruption in both countries, because we both have corruption issues. And the extent to which we can share our experiences and share how we address these issues, it's going to make us both better. But obviously corruption can be a problem. But what we're seeing here is real interest on the part of American companies and American investors. And the more American investors we have here, the more American companies we have here, the more Nigerians we have working in the United States, the greater our common efforts are going to be to fight corruption.
So how does the U.S. government relate with governments that it considers corrupt?
Well, obviously, what's important for us are governments that are democratic, governments that are chosen by the people, because that creates a common experience and a common basis of values that allow us to have dialogues. We're going to find corruption all around the world. That's just part of the human condition. But the good thing about democracies, especially democracies that are transparent, is that citizens have a way of communicating their concerns to the government, and that creates a better dialogue about things like corruption. Well, I think we're much better at detecting these kinds of things, but also we've built very strong partnerships with countries like Nigeria, where we both share common concerns about terrorism because we're both targets of terrorist attacks. And I think that's helped a lot.
But you're also offering, the U.S. is offering logistical support to Nigeria to fight Boko Haram as it tries to curb its activities. But would you say your help has been successful so far?
Listen, our help is only going to be successful completely when all terrorism is done with. But at this point in time, we're going to continue to work with our Nigerian partners to fight terrorism wherever it appears. But the attacks of Boko Haram in different parts of Nigeria over the last several days have been horrific. We condemn them and we offer our condolences and sympathies to the many families that have been touched by this awful series of events. But we also reaffirm our commitment to Nigeria to work together in the fight against terrorism.
The U.S. has suggested a multifaceted approach to fighting terrorism. Would one of them include, finding the source to which these terrorists get their arms?
It's one of the many, or as you said, the multifaceted approach to fighting terrorism. We have found that you really need a comprehensive approach to deal with terrorism, which means there's a security side to it, there's a weapons side to it, but there's also a social and economic side to it.
But do they show that there is an improvement in the fight against terrorism?
Listen, the fight against terrorism is up and down because terrorists, by their very nature, are looking for different moments to attack. And so we just have to be vigilant constantly. But I think this highlights the fact, first of all, the broad rejection by Nigerian society of this kind of behavior, but more importantly, the broad rejection of the international community, and by all religions and all countries. And I heard this loud and clear in Abuja during the Centenary celebrations, all the African nations, no matter whether they were Arab or African, whether they spoke Arabic or spoke English or French or Portuguese or Spanish or tribal languages, they all condemn those actions.
Fun, inspiration, and knowledge. That's what you get from readers, writers, publishers, and the entire book world. Get some interesting reviews, events, interviews, and latest updates from the book world. The Channels Book Club, inspiring you one page at a time.
Welcome back. Something really serious is happening within Ukraine, suggesting the Crimea region may be on its way out of the country. It's already claiming allegiance to Russia, ordering a full military mobilization in response to Russia's buildup of its forces on the Crimea Peninsula. Just last week, the Russian parliament approved President Vladimir Putin's request to deploy troops to Crimea until normalcy is restored. And that decision has got the United States warning Russia of any interference. At this point, Russia is also facing some form of sanctioning from other world leaders, especially EU countries, should it decide to go ahead with the deployment.
And the sanctions may be coming from none other than Russia's continental neighbors, the UK and the EU, who have joined forces with the United States and Canada to condemn the latest decision. Even NATO sees red lights ahead for Russia, but unlike its allies, needs a consensus to arrive at a decision. Before an emergency meeting held on Sunday, NATO chief Anders Rasmussen warned that Russia's actions in Ukraine could destabilize the continent. But diplomats say that they do not expect the body to agree on significant measures to pressure Russia.
We call on Russia to de-escalate tensions. We call upon Russia to honor all its international commitments, to withdraw its forces to its bases, and to refrain from any interference elsewhere in Ukraine.
But if a 90-minute call from US President Barack Obama to President Vladimir Putin on Saturday and other calls to the Kremlin by European leaders has done nothing to change Russia's decision, there is no telling NATO's sanctions, should they be imposed, will be the game changer. Britain announced on Sunday it will suspend its participation in preparations for a G8 meeting in Sochi, towing the same line with the United States, which says they will not take part in the meetings, and France also not planning to attend.
First of all, of course, to meet the new Ukrainian authorities. I've had telephone calls with many of them over the last few days. I think it's very important to meet them, including the acting president. It's very important that we all do everything we can to calm tensions. The Ukrainians have said to me in the last couple of days that they will not rise to provocations, and of course I will strongly advise them to continue with that approach. I'm very concerned by reports this morning of escalating tension. We will also continue to urge the Russians to speak directly to the Ukrainians through ministers, through military channels. They've so far not wanted to do that. I urged Foreign Minister Lavrov yesterday to do that. And in the absence of that, I think we have to explore how they can speak to each other under the auspices of the United Nations or of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe.
He's arrived in Kiev to discuss the unfolding crisis with Russia. Already, Russian forces have bloodlessly seized Crimea, an isolated Black Sea peninsula where it has a naval base. By Sunday, men in camouflage surrounded several small Ukrainian military outposts there and demanded that Ukrainian troops disarm. The men had no insignia on their uniforms, but drove vehicles with Russian plates and seized government buildings, airports, and other locations. Commander of Ukrainian Marines said he had barricaded into the Food Osai base and refused a Russian demand that his troops give up their weapons. However, Ukraine's armed forces is deemed to be no match for the Russian army, as the country has fewer than 130,000 troops under arms, with planes barely ready to fly and few spare parts for a single submarine.